Hey guys, what's going on? Wanted to follow up from yesterday's Nintendo Direct. I got to play a few games. I tried the Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and some Metroid, so I wanted to show you guys some of that. Starting off with Game Boy. It's very interesting that at first when they showed it, it just seemed to have like the pea green or whatever you want to call that color, original DMG Game Boy, Game Boy Pocket, and then the color kind of version, or not color, it was Game Boy Light. Game Boy Light. So it was interesting to me because when they originally showed it, they didn't show that you could kind of shrink it down into a smaller screen, which would have been cool if they had a Game Boy bezel around that when you do it. So that helps a little bit if you're playing on a very large display to kind of like clean it up a little bit. But it does have a filter in there to make it look like the original screens. I'll show you guys like some differences here between the two. But in my opinion, we've seen a few different people try these, like different instances of like getting that original Game Boy look, whether it be the Pocket or the DMG or whatnot. This thing is, it's about as basic as you can get it. It does a good job of doing the original grid layout, but you don't really get a sense that you're looking at like a reflective display or anything like that. This definitely has some weird blurring that they added to it to make it look like the original screen. I didn't notice it when I was playing in portable mode. Definitely noticed it on my TV, and I think that's a little weird. But I think maybe the blur also helps hides that it's just basically a grid overlaid on top of the image, right? So where some other implementations, I think the one that is in the Contra collections, whether it be like Contra or the Castlevania collections, the Game Boy games in that also have a similar filter, and I think it does look just a tad bit better. And I'll show you guys an example of the two side by side here. For what you're getting for free in the games that you're getting, the fact that you're getting like 6 golden coins, Wario 3, Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening DX, all very good games, and I'm glad that they have the Game Boy Color games and those in there as well, so that's pretty cool. It would have been cool to see some Super Game Boy implementation in there too, because some games like Game and Watch Collection, like I think all of them, like 1, 2, and 3, not only worked both on the regular Game Boy, but also had the Color Game Boy, and then they also had the data in there to work with Super Game Boy with a bunch of different overlays, and that was really cool because when you would play like the original Game and Watch games, the entire screen would change to where you would see the border look like the original Game and Watch game itself. The other thing that's really cool about the Game Boy games is you can go in and set it to Game Boy Color mode, and it's a little weird. You can't, at least as far as I can tell, you can't actually go in and set the color that you want or the color pattern like you could on the original Game Boy Advance or Game Boy Color. So it just has like a preset setting, and that's a little bit weird, but the presets that they chose look pretty good, so I don't really have a major problem with it. Okay, I'm going to try something here and show you guys a little bit like what analogs. Okay, so this is what it looks like with what they call the mint green color. So this is just their basic screen, they're black and white. You can add a little bit of color to the Pocket. Then this one's an awesome implementation. This is like they call their DMG. It might just look green, but if you look really closely, and sorry about the way I'm capturing this, but the implementation of the original dot matrix is really, really damn good here. You can see a little bit of the dot matrix there. All right, but no joke, guys. This is a $200, actually like $220 handheld right now, FPGA handheld that does a jack of all trades, but those filters are like part of it. I think you'll see a lot of Nintendo first-party games, maybe some Konami stuff. Maybe they'll like have like some of the Castlevania games on there and stuff eventually. Hopefully they have well, they can't because it was part of a collection. There was a colorized version of both Adventure that actually had like a fix to it from like the screen tearing and slowdown and stuff. And then there was also the second one done, Castlevania Adventure 2, redone on color on the Game Boy Color, but it was part of a collection. So I don't know if they could separate that and make it its own thing. But regardless, I think it's possible we could see that on there. I don't think so because Shantae has its own separate release from the original Shantae on Game Boy Color has its own separate release on there, so I don't think we'll be seeing that. And because the Turtles games, the Game Boy games are in the Cowabunga collection, I don't think we'll be seeing those on the service too. But some games that we could see, seeing that we're getting some like lesser known ones, but really great games like Gargoyle's Quest on the service, we could actually get Avenging Spirit, which is a game that was kind of like Mario Odyssey before Mario Odyssey. It's you got a bunch of bad guys in the world. You're a ghost. You have a certain amount of power to get from like one body to the other, and you can possess people, and they have different attributes and stuff to get you through the world. And so it is kind of like an early Mario Odyssey in that sense. So I would like to see that. I would like to see some of the pinball games, like the Pokemon pinball, but mostly Kirby's pinball. That's a really great video pinball game that I think a lot of people need to play. And even on Advance, there was like Mario pinball and Pokemon pinball on the Game Boy Advance. But moving on to the Advance, Mario Kart on Game Boy is okay. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about that version now is if you actually beat all the cups in Super Mario Kart Super Circuit, that's kind of redundant in saying that twice. Actually the entire Super Mario Kart game from the SNES has been retold and put into that game. So basically you unlock all those cups and all those tracks as well. So there's quite a bit of meat for that game. So there's a bit to go through on there. The other thing that's really cool about the advanced games is they've introduced Rumble support back in. So a lot of people don't know this, but there are a few games, like I think Drill Dozer might have been the first game, and that cart actually did have a vibration motor built into it, but it had a feature when you plugged it into the Game Boy player on the GameCube, it wouldn't vibrate the cartridge anymore, it would vibrate the GameCube controller when you had it plugged in. Same deal with playing games like Super Mario, I guess Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Brothers 3. If you play that, there's some vibration function in the game. It's mostly just when you get hit. Mario and Luigi, that has some vibration in it. There was a couple other games too. So the fact that they're able to like do that through the Switch Rumble is kind of a neat like little extra gimmick. There is a filter to make it look like the LCD screen. Matter of fact, I think they just have one, so you're not like separating it between the backlit Game Boy Advance and the front lit one. But there is a difference in the way that they look. So this actually has that difference on it where you can select those filters, but this is just an on and off thing. There's a weird thing with that filter whenever you go to a white screen or anything that's like filling up like a white area, there's these like black dots that show up, which is like just a weird kind of thing. So I think that needs some work. When you have an overall image that's got a pretty good saturation across and not just like a big white screen, the effect looks pretty good. But for the most part, I would just turn it off or shrink the screen down or something like that. I think the fact that that white kind of does that effect with the dots. I remember the original Game Boy screen doing that. That looks weird every time that happens. We're getting some pretty good games. We're getting a lot of Zeldas. We're getting F-Zero's finally getting something, right? We're getting Golden Sun, which is great. Which, by the way, Maximum Velocity is okay, but GP Legend, much better F-Zero game on the Game Boy Advance. So hopefully we'll see that soon. There's a lot of interesting ports. Also, I forgot to say that Mario Brothers 3 had extra levels through a thing called e-reader. It was basically like a card reader where you could add levels and stuff to it. And that particular area where you would like download all your extra thing, you just bought card packs and just scan these cards to add levels to the game, right? That actually has all 38 levels. We only got 12 here in the US, and they got all 38 in Japan. So, and then over in Europe, they didn't get anything. So the fact that everybody's getting all 38 of those levels to try out and everything, that's pretty cool. Overall, the emulation is pretty solid across all these. I don't have any real complaints. There's like some weird like effects going on where like sprites are showing on through like pipes and stuff in like Mario Brothers 2 6 golden coins. But other than that, I couldn't really find anything that sounds pretty good on it. Nintendo did a pretty good job on this. The separation of the advanced games to the Game Boy, I think, is a fair separation. This service is finally getting some value out of it. I would wish that like a lot of the stuff like the DLC for like Splatoon, for instance, was just automatically like included with that. That would make the value seem a little bit better. But the fact you're getting some of these really good games like Zelda, Minish Cap, and then later on like Metroid Fusion, like that was one of the complaints about like when Dread came out, is there wasn't a way to play Fusion. Well, guess what? Now you can play Fusion and see that like over arc. I think we now officially have every single Metroid game on that service, and you can follow that arc all the way from Metroid 1 all the way into Dread, which is great. And hopefully one day we'll get Metroid Zero Mission on there. Just one thing I want to mention real quick in case you didn't know, Zelda came up towards the end of the thing, and I ended up finding out yesterday when I was looking to see whenever the hell they're going to drop this collector's edition that we're supposedly supposed to be able to get or pre-order at some time, which is probably already gone by the time I made this video. I probably already missed my shot. But Zelda is where Switch games have typically been 60. They finally made a $70 Switch game, and it's Tears of the Kingdom. So that's to be said. It's not shocking. The industry, just everything got a lot more expensive in the last couple of years, so it's not surprising that games are going to start coming out at $70. It's interesting though because Nintendo usually locks down a lot of their prices until another generation comes up, right? So this generation started with 60, so I'm kind of wondering like, is Tears of the Kingdom like forward compatible with the possible Switch 2? And that's the prices we can expect on Switch 2. Maybe that's why they're doing that. Because a couple of things about coming up on the next generation, I just gotta say, is like, I don't see Nintendo. I would hope that they were not dumb enough to do something so completely new that's away from the hybrid model and also doesn't support the current card slot for the Switch. I think it's pretty safe to say there's no reason that this memory, just like when they went from Game Boy, Game Boy Color to Game Boy Advance and the tech got better and better, those pin outputs were still good enough to handle higher and higher bandwidth. So there's no reason that they can't make carts that are higher and higher bandwidth for next generation hardware and just have everything else be backwards compatible or forward compatible in some cases. Like we saw with the black carts on the Game Boy, Game Boy Color. There were black carts that worked on the Game Boy and also on the Game Boy Color. So I wonder if they do that, if we'll have that again, where we'll just have cross compatibility with like certain games and stuff. Okay, so sorry to go on a weird tirade there. Anyways, Metroid dropped yesterday. Metroid Prime Remastered. And when I heard this, I was kind of like, okay, they probably did some extra controls. They probably made it like a little bit better looking textures and stuff. They had to. The original textures, both on the Trilogy and GameCube, were not great when you look at them in HD. But man, they did a lot of work to this. Now I think this is still, believe it or not, the original engine, and they've just completely gutted it. They tore it down to the wireforms, because when you look at the animations and stuff, one to one in the comparisons, they look identical. Maybe they just reuse those assets. Maybe this is the newer engine they're going to use. If this is the newer engine for the new Metroid Prime 4 that they're using, I'm okay with it because this thing looks freaking awesome. So I'm going to end the video today with just a few minutes of Metroid Prime Remastered. And I don't know, guys. It's like one of those shady areas where it's more like kind of like a remake, but not really a remake. And definitely not a remaster. It just sits in that gray area somewhere. And the fact that it's $40, pretty damn good deal, especially when you consider like stuff like Zelda and Mario Deluxe and stuff. It didn't have any graphical upgrades, just made the look better in HD and stuff. That's all. It just up-resed it. So the fact that this is 40 and it looks the way it does, and it's easily one of the better looking games on the Switch, which is just crazy. But yeah, if you've never played a Prime game, this is easily the best Prime game out of the three that came out so far. So go ahead and snatch it up. Anyways, you guys have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.
Data received. Recorded to logbook.